Hope you all recognize that at the end of each rainbow is a pot of gold and some Irish pixies. We haven't seen any today, but we're absolutely confident that they're here someplace. So we do welcome you this morning, and we're going to, Ms. Keogh is here. She's the vice chair. We need one more for quorum, but we're going to go ahead and start the hearing with the admonition that we will, in fact, stop the hearing when the third member of the committee arrives so that we can call for a quorum, and then at the same time take up the suspense calendar that we have one bill. Don't anticipate any difficulty with the consent calendar being passed out. I think I said suspense, I meant consent. So at any rate, with that, let me thank you for coming this morning, and at this time, let me also just give you some general rules. We in fact are going to have Brian this morning start about 9:35. Brian Weinberger, who is a consultant for the Senate Local Government Committee, he's going to talk and spend about 15 or 20 minutes talking about this particular issue. And then we're going to have two panels. We have the supervisor from San Mateo County. We have the county administrator from Tulare County. Now, each have been, and then we go to the second panel, and each person will be given about roughly 5 minutes to speak. We haven't had a great deal of difficulty with this, but if the person before you takes more than 5 minutes, you just have what's left. So you just need to be aware of that, and if it appears that they are speaking longer than you think they should speak, it is a situation where you need to call their attention to that if in fact I haven't already done that. But we do in fact have a quorum this morning, so all of you will call the roll to establish a quorum. We will start first with that.
Senators Cox? Here. Cox here. Kehoe? Here. Kehoe here. Onestad? Here. Onestad here. Price? Wiggins.
We will keep the roll over, and it's my understanding that Ms. Wiggins will not be here today, that Mr. Price will be here. We'll give him the opportunity to vote on the consent calendar, and if we would have a motion for the consent calendar, if there's not any questions. All right. Can you record a double? Ms. Keogh and Senator Onestad both made the motion. All right. Call the roll, please.
On the consent calendar, Senators Cox?
Aye.
Cox, aye. Kehoe? Aye. Kehoe, aye. Onestad? Aye. Onestad, aye.
All right. Let's begin our business then as far as the hearing is concerned this morning. So, Brian, Mr. Weinberger, if you would begin with your presentation, we will go from there.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. The laws governing the consolidation of county offices are a fraying patchwork of statutes. After more than a century of special legislation authorizing only some counties to consolidate only some offices, the codes have become inconsistent, redundant in places, and certainly confusing. Nevertheless, counties seeking to either save money in the face of severe fiscal challenges or to improve the delivery of certain county services or both frequently consider consolidating some county offices. And so in order for us to ensure that county governments can structure themselves to best meet local needs here in the 21st century, it is time for the legislature to reconsider these statutes governing consolidations, which have their roots back in the 19th century. To help us do that, this morning we're going to hear from two panels of county officials who have significant expertise and experience grappling with these statutes and with the issues relating to county office consolidations, and I know we're anxious to hear from them. So that we have ample time to do that, I'm not actually going to go through all of the detailed discussion that's in the briefing paper that's been provided. I can simply note for your reference that there is a legislative history and brief background of current law that begins on page 1 of the briefing paper, a discussion of office consolidations in large counties versus small counties begins towards the bottom of page 3, a discussion of office consolidations and the incompatible offices doctrine begins towards the bottom of page 4 of the paper. A comparison of how charter counties versus general law counties handle office consolidations is discussed in the section that begins towards the top of page 6. And towards the top of page 7, you will find a brief discussion of issues relating to the qualifications of individuals holding consolidated offices. But what I want to do, and let me point out, there are at the end of each of those sections a couple of policy questions suggested that may be helpful in considering each of those individual issues. But what I want to do this morning actually is two things. First, to just look at one of the code sections that we're talking about, hopefully to demonstrate the need for, at a minimum, some cleanup, some simplification, some standardization in this area of the law, and then to conclude by underscoring just two of the broad policy concerns that may be helpful as we listen to this morning's speakers and think about how to address this issue going forward. So to look at the code sections, if we can go to page A2 of the briefing paper. This is towards the back in Appendix A, which contains the government code sections that are relevant to today's topic. And there, towards the top of page 2 is Government Code Section 24304. On the face of it, it seems fairly straightforward. It's a list of 26 different county office combinations that are authorized to be consolidated by ordinance in what the section tells us are counties of the 13th to 58th classes. Now that is a little opaque. It uses this arcane county classification system, but it becomes even more opaque and eventually I would suggest to you nonsensical when you take into account some additional facts. First of all, subdivisions A through P that are listed there are in fact combinations that are authorized elsewhere in code for all counties to use. And so, in fact, those aren't consolidations that are simply limited to the 13th through 58th classes. A little more research brings to light the fact that of the 12 counties not included under this code section, 10 of them are charter counties, which in fact, under the powers of their county charters, could consolidate all of these offices and others that aren't even mentioned in statute without any constraint under the state's general laws. And so what we're left with, in fact, is a statute that singles out two counties, two of California's 58 counties, Contra Costa and Riverside, and identifies a handful of these combinations at the end of the section and says that those two counties cannot do those consolidations in the same manner that the other 58 can. If you actually go to the next page, the next section there, 24304.1, is specific to a county of the 11th class. That's otherwise known as Riverside County, which has come to the legislature and gotten subsequent special legislation authorizing just a couple of these combinations that were in the previous section. So we in the end, in effect, have a state law that says that in Contra Costa County, that's the only county where we prohibit, for example, a sheriff, coroner, and public administrator from being combined. And I would submit to you that there would be great difficulty in finding what the compelling state interest is in regulating these consolidations to that level of detail, to that level of restrictiveness. And so I think hopefully this is not an isolated example of the way these code sections work, and I hope demonstrates the need for the discussion that we're going to have today. And so that we can move on to hear from the real experts in this area, I simply want to conclude by suggesting two broad policy questions that I think may be helpful for the committee to keep in mind as we listen to the discussion and think about moving forward. First of all, I hope that we can hear from the speakers information that gives us a better idea of more specifically what problems do counties face in practice when they look at doing office consolidations. Are the statutes inconsistent, and if so, which provisions need to be fixed? Are the statutes too restrictive in places? Are there places where the statutes are not restrictive or specific enough in terms of how office consolidations ought to work? Are there non-statutory obstacles to counties structuring themselves in the way that they feel is necessary to meet the needs of their residents? So the first question is specifically what are the obstacles, the issues, the problems that the counties are confronting? Secondly, which follows from that, when we identify these problems, I think it would be helpful to consider which of those issues, obstacles, challenges are best addressed at the state level, which of those involve some level of state interest that requires a state law or some form of state intervention, and which of those problems, obstacles, challenges are best addressed by the counties, by county officials, by county residents through local mechanisms. In short, hopefully from today's presentations we can get some determination of where there is a role for the state and where the state ought to simply step back and get out of the way. And so I will conclude on that note and would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Q, any questions? No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was with a city manager not too long ago that Brian did say that it would be helpful if the state just disappeared. He felt that his operation would be much cleaner and easier to get the job done. So with that, let's ask the first panel to come forth. That would be Supervisor Gordon, Ms. Russo, who's the county administrator from Tulare County, and Martha Schaefer, who's the county counsel from Amador County. So if you will come forward. Yeah, I'm going to move this out of your way. Good morning. And so, Mr. Gordon, if you will begin, and I want to just call to your attention again that we've allocated 15 minutes for this panel. And so, in generic terms, you have about 5 minutes. And I'll leave it up to your fellow member there to see that it's reasonably close to that.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. I'm Rich Gordon. I am president of the San Mateo County Board of Supervisors, a past president of the California State Association of Counties. San Mateo County is a charter county. We were chartered in 1932. Since that time, we have amended our charter by citizen action on 22 occasions. In 1993, when a long-time elected county assessor retired, we went to the voters to seek consolidation and were successful in consolidating the assessor's office with the clerk recorder's office. In 2001, when an elected coroner died, we went to the citizens to seek a combination of the coroner's office with our sheriff's office, and the citizens rejected that. So on one occasion, we have been successful in getting a combination, and another we were not. We feel that all counties, charter counties and general law counties, should have maximum flexibility in the organization of their governments. We think that consolidation provides administrative benefits, particularly in terms of attracting good talent, In many cases, qualifications for these offices are an important issue, and finding qualified individuals to fill these positions is important, particularly in rural counties. There are challenges in finding folks to fill some of these positions with the appropriate skills, talents, and knowledge as our government has become more complex and more complicated in its operation. There are also, we think, practical reasons for combination. There are aligned functions. Certainly there are duties and responsibilities which in this era fit well together. I think it's interesting to note that clearly counties across the state have understood that the treasurer function and the tax collector function are ones that are compatible. All 58 counties have combined those offices. And all but 10 counties in the state have combined the clerk and the recorder. We also think that there are administrative benefits in personnel management. It allows for maximum use of human resource functions, cross-training of personnel, and we think that those are important. And also, there are cost savings, and in some cases significant cost savings in combining functions. As we in government look to ways to make ourselves more efficient and to better use the tax dollar provided to us by the citizens, we think it's important to consider consolidation as an option. I would note that a board of supervisors in a county has the legislative function in the county. And it is long established that one of the duties and functions of a legislative body is to establish the organization of the government functions. And so county supervisors can, if given the authority, organize government functions in a way that makes sense at the local level. As they do that, they can establish clear oversight, checks and balances in the process, so concerns about incompatibility of offices can be addressed as the local legislative function is implemented by a board of supervisors. I would also note that because boards of supervisors operate under the Brown Act in California, all of these actions relative to consolidation, organization of government function, are done in full public scrutiny, with the opportunity for the public to be engaged in the discussion and dialogue about whether this is an appropriate means of organizing the government. And there is nothing that ever would preclude a board of supervisors from bringing these issues to a public vote. Finally, I would note that one of the things that I think boards of supervisors can do if given the authority is act in a timely manner. One of our experiences clearly has been that in one of the best times to look at these consolidations is when you have a vacancy in one of the department head functions. That gives you a chance to think about consolidation without having to be concerned about which incumbent stays and which incumbent goes. And a board of supervisors, if given flexibility, could act in a timely manner to complete a consolidation when there is a resignation, a retirement, or a death. And so I would argue and suggest that all counties, charter and general law, should be given maximum flexibility under their legislative function to organize the government in a way that makes the most sense to their citizens and in their county.
Thank you. Ms. Keough, do you have any questions of Mr. Gordon?
Just basically, since you're the first speaker, Supervisor Gordon, the general thrust is streamlining the organization, saving some public dollars, more efficiencies in your administrative process. And I wanted to know what's your thinking on why the voters adopted one measure and not the other?
I think that in the first case, the assessor who was retiring was a strong supporter of the consolidation, and so as he was one who was involved in the ballot issue, wrote part of the ballot measure. The second case, the coroner had passed away. We had a brand new sheriff. Folks that did not know that sheriff well. We're not sure that they understood what he could do or not do. And there were arguments made by a couple of other elected officials suggesting that we should not eliminate elected positions. From our perspective, it would have made tremendous sense to combine the coroner with the sheriff. We think those functions align well. There would have been great administrative savings. And in our case, one of the challenges that we see is when we elect a coroner, we don't always get someone who is qualified in those functions. Our current coroner in that position had been an assistant in the office for a year. That was his only experience in a coroner function. And so I think that there are some advantages, but we were unable to convince the voters of that.
And when was that?
2001.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, let's go then to our second panelist, who is the County Administrator of Tulare County.
Thank you, Senator Cox. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to this matter.
Need to probably pull that just a little closer to you, sir.
Okay. So thank you for allowing me to speak to this matter. To start with, I fully support the comments by Supervisor Gordon. But before I start with my comments, I'd like to give a little background that will shed some light on my perspective on this issue. I started with Fresno County in March of 1990 in the Consolidated Auditor, Controller, Treasurer, Tax Collector's Office. I worked there for 14 years on both the Treasury side and the Auditor Controller side. So I have some experience in a consolidated office environment. I've since gone to work for the County of Tulare and as a Deputy CAO, and now in my capacity as CAO for the last 2.5 years. So I'm considered a rookie CAO among my counterparts. What I look at to base my recommendations on are what's in practice in this state. If you look at the recap at the back part of the handout that was given to us, you have 13 sheriff public administrators departments in the county. You have 35 sheriff coroner combined departments in the state. And there's only 10 departments that are just sheriff alone. So there's a wide variety of combinations in practice and has been in practice for a long time. On the district attorney side, there were 13 district attorney public administrators and 45 district attorneys. So you have examples of combinations there. On the auditor controller side, which is near and dear to my heart, there are 11 auditor assessor recorder offices. There are 15 assessor clerk recorder offices. And finally, there are 32 just assessor departments alone. Wide variety of combinations, big and small counties. It doesn't depend on the size, the population, what have you. You'll find combinations in different counties. In the auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector arena, you have 5 counties that have gone to the finance director model. Being a CAO, being somewhat of a control freak, that really is I view it in a positive way. I think it addresses the challenge sometimes that counties have in bringing qualified candidates in. And if you ever want a qualified candidate, your auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector, you really want someone good in that position. There are 6 counties that have combined auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector offices, and the remaining 47 would be the old type of auditor controller, the separate departments. So my point is that there's a wide variety of combinations, both in big and small counties, currently in practice. And with that being said, I think existing practice should dictate the amount of flexibility counties should have. So based on the Constitution, which requires only supervisors, sheriffs, DAs, and assessors to be elected, I agree with that. And my specific cleanup for statutes would be, I would clean up statutes 24300 and 24304 that have a list of potential department combinations. I would clean it up and I would apply it to all counties, both charter and non-charter. It doesn't make any sense to me at this stage of my career that you should differentiate between large counties, small counties, rural, urban, charter, general law. I think it should be applied to everyone since the combinations that I cited earlier cross both charter and general law counties. Secondly, I would consider repealing Government Code 1099. It's a good faith effort on the legislator's part to address the incompatible powers issue, but the reality is counties have gotten around that by special legislation. So what's the point of having something law if you're not going to follow it or allow counties to get around it? To me, it's somewhat of a lobbying employment act, and that's something that we could definitely streamline. Lastly, quite frankly, I think if we're going to go down this road and provide counties enhanced flexibility, which, believe me, as a CAO who just gave the mid-year budget presentation last year, counties are in a world of hurt. We're going through some of the worst economic times in our lifetime. I recently attended a retirement dinner for a CAO who had been a county employee for 40 years, 20 as a CAO and 20 as the deputy. Last year was the first budget he had never been able to balance in his career. So it says a lot. So I'll end my comments by saying if we're going to go down this road, consider the not repealing but adjusting Government Code 24009 that requires voter approval for counties that wish to create appointed directors of their auditor, controller, or finance functions. I think it addresses the challenge that some counties have with their auditors in terms of finding good talent and elected auditors who actually do their jobs. Not to take anything away from the electeds, there are a lot of good elected auditor controllers, and there's some that aren't as good. And those are my comments.
Thank you, Mr. Russo. Let me just, Ms. Keough?
Just very, very direct. That was helpful. Thank you.
Let me just inquire of you, Mr. Gordon, and you, Ms. Schaefer, before we go on. Do you agree with Mr. Russo's comments about the changing of the two code sections that he outlined?
Yes, I do.
How about you, Ms. Schaefer?
In large part, yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's the largest part. What's the small part that you don't agree with then?
I would not necessarily amend Section 24009. I think that the legislature should leave the elected offices as the ones that are specified in the Constitution, and instead of enumerating certain offices and requiring all others to be elected, determine if there is, as a matter of statewide concern, a particular office that you think needs to be elected, and instead make that one elected rather than a larger list.
I understand. Thank you. Now, we're going to pause here for just a half a second to give Mr. Price the opportunity to vote on the consent calendar, and then we're going to close the roll. So all of you will.
On the consent calendar, Senator Price. Aye. Price, aye.
Thank you very much. Roll's closed.
Mr. Chairman, may I, would you just run that last comment by me again? You would rather, I don't think we have 24009 in front of us unless I'm missing something, but I'll trust you for what it says. What's your point?
Government Code Section 24009 enumerates a number of different counties which are not counties, number of different positions which are not required by the Constitution to be elected, but which the legislature has required to be elected. And I would recommend, and perhaps maybe it's language, in cleanup, I think the better approach would be to start from saying, is there anything as a matter of statewide concern that we think needs to be elected, and enumerate that one, but rather than have a laundry list of things that the legislature has determined should be elective offices.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Okay. All right. Ms. Schaefer, who's the county counsel for Amador County, which is located in the first Senate District. Just as a matter of information this meeting. Represent a very, very, very fine senator, by the way. Ms. Schaefer, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to appear. I am a recent veteran of a county consolidation engagement. I'd like to describe that experience briefly and then make some comments and recommendations. Some years ago, Amador County combined its district attorney and public administrator offices. Public administrator also incorporated, as a matter of management efficiency, the offices of public guardian and public conservator. Well, over time, that combination of basically law enforcement, which is now focusing on law enforcement, and what is essentially a social service providing for people who need to be conserved and managing their estates, that function more clearly fits in, and there are lots of efficiencies with our Department of Social Services and Behavioral Health. So we determined that we wanted to make that switch, and we could easily make the switch for public conservator and public guardian, but we could not make the switch for public administrator. Even though it was non-controversial in our county, even though it made management sense, we couldn't do that without a state law change. So our solution was to seek state legislation to add Amador County to a list. This is one of the exclusions that we keep talking about. A list of counties in 24011 that could, in which the Board of Supervisors could, by ordinance, appoint a public administrator and combine that office with public guardian. I want to emphasize that that process was a very pleasant process. Well, first of all, Amador County has the good sense to have your chairman as its senator, and their staff was very helpful and supportive. And then we used the vehicle of your omnibus bill because there was no controversy, and we received a lot of staff guidance and a great deal of assistance, which I appreciated. It was very pleasant. It took a long time. It took the better part of a year to accomplish this. So it postponed the time that we could actually enact cost savings and efficiencies. It took processing time and effort both on the county and the state level. And, I submit to you that there was probably minimal state interest in whether or not our public administrator was combined with the DA or with the public guardian. So my general comments are in 24300 and 24304, you have, I guess, what I call a two-sizes-fit-all attempt by the state to determine what combinations make sense and what don't. Well, even if you could make a determination, which I think any county, a bunch of counties probably can't determine something that's going to fit for everybody, and the state legislature, I think, would have that same difficulty to know what would fit in all counties. Even if you could determine it right now, it's going to change over time, so it would have to be continually amended over time. Like any generic legislative solution, starts, if it doesn't fit, starts to generate exclusions, sort of like mushrooms after a rain. We start having all sorts of statutes now that are enacted to allow for combinations because it doesn't fit. The situation just doesn't fit. And these are frequently inconsistent. Here's an example of the inconsistency. We talked about 24304.2 allows four named counties to combine treasurer, tax collector, auditor, and controller. But there are no eligibility requirements, so presumably anybody could serve there. However, in 26980 and 26981, where you talk about those same four offices that are combined with the director of finance, then you say, well, the director of finance has to meet either the requirements, the eligibility requirements of either the treasurer or the auditor as set forth in law. So, you start having all these different statutes and they don't mesh entirely. So I will echo both of my colleagues on the panel. These are very stringent, unprecedented budget times. Every county is looking at streamlining. We have to become efficient as possible, and we have to do that as quickly as possible. And I guess my mantra, if there is one, is that the local entities, local government agencies need flexibility to be able to meet this challenge. So my recommendations, elected versus appointed, to leave the elected offices, those which are specified in the Constitution, which is set forth in your briefing paper, to basically repeal all the statutes prescribing what offices are allowed to be combined. It's 24,300 and 24,304. And instead, the proper role for the state could be, instead of trying to define what consolidated offices are allowable, instead look and determine if there are some offices that you believe, as a matter of state concern, there is such a danger of incompatibility or conflict of interest that those you want to say cannot be combined. Otherwise, allow counties the flexibility on the local level to determine how they could structure themselves to meet their challenges. The other role for the state that I think is important is to determine, in some cases, minimum eligibility and continuing education requirements where those for those offices in which such standards are really important as a matter of state concern, to make sure that you have qualified people filling them. And in that respect, I perhaps direct your attention to how the statutes treat the road commissioner. And this is another instance of whether you have a rule and then you start having exclusions. First, you have Streets and Highways Code 2006, which says road commissioners must be registered civil engineers. Then you have 2006.5, which says road commissioners must be registered civil engineers unless you're Orange County and have an environmental management agency. And then you have the big exclusion, which is road commissioners must be civil engineers unless the county establishes a director of transportation and assigns all of the engineering functions to the registered civil engineer to be performed under the authority of that director of transportation. And I think that's a really beneficial way to look at things. First of all, you can hire a person who can manage, which may not be an engineer. But you also make sure that your engineering functions are performed by somebody who's qualified. So you allow counties to have both the engineering and the management expertise that they need to perform those functions most efficiently. I think you could do the same sort of thing with your director of finance. There's sort of an attempt at this in 23-406, but that's only applicable to counties with populations of over 4 million. It talks about allows the Board of Supervisors to decide if sufficient personnel are employed to allow those functions to be performed with competent professional advice. So you could kind of use that model but clean up that language. So again, my plea is flexibility. The critical offices that need to be elected are in the Constitution. Leave it at that unless you feel that there are certain offices where there is a real danger of incompatibility, and then prohibit the combination of those offices. Otherwise, allow flexibility. I think a simple requirement that county decisions as to their offices and management structure be adopted by ordinance would allow the use of the referendum by the local people, so as a check to curb abuses. And the state could, again, still play a role in determining where necessary if there are minimum education or experience requirements. Well, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for coming.
I wish you well.
Ms. Q, any questions?
Just a comment, Mr. Chairman. A very, very thoughtful presentation, and it seems as though your bottom line is to as much flexibility as possible at the local level. Allow local ordinances to determine the fate of these consolidations or not, and I also like your point that local ordinances would be referendable, which is the ultimate check, as you put it, on abuses or. The public's disagreeing with the action at the board level. So those are all good points.
Mr. Price? Nothing. All right. Let me thank the three panelists. Thank you for coming this morning. We're now going to have another panel, and we hope that if you can, you will stick around. We're going to have some other folks who are not part of a panel who may very well have some questions that you can answer. Please just take a seat, and we will begin by asking Karen Adams, who is the treasurer, tax collector, county clerk, registrar of voter revenues officer, 1937 Act trustee, as well as a CPA from Merced County. So, Ms. Adams, if you would like to begin
yes.
With your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Cox. Good morning, all, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I am Karen Adams, the elected Merced County Treasurer, Tax Collector, County Clerk, Registrar of Voters, and Revenue Officer. In addition, I am the ex officio trustee for the Merced County Employees Retirement Association, which, of course, is a 1937 Act retirement system. I state all my titles not in arrogance, but rather to show the multiple hats that I wear each day. And in addition to that, I am a CPA. And as the elected treasurer tax collector, I do meet 4 out of the 5 qualifications to run for office. I began my career as a CPA at a CPA firm focusing on audit and tax law. 17 years ago, I transferred to public sector at Merced County as a staff accountant in the Auditor Controller's office. Several years later, I was promoted to the Assistant Treasurer Tax Collector for the Treasury and Investment Fixed Income Portfolio Investing. In 2002, I was approached, and of course, I have been in office, for 8 years. So I've just concluded my second term, and as of Friday, they're stuck with me for 4 more years. So in 2002, I was approached by, 2008, I was approached by the CEO who inquired about my thoughts about consolidating the auditor controller with the treasurer tax due to the auditor's retirement. And to no surprise to the CEO, because we had had this discussion years earlier, I declined the offer and reiterated my position that I believe a consolidation of offices would violate the independence and provide no protection for the citizens. He agreed and instead offered me the other 4 departments under the Auditor Controller office. In an effort to be a team player, I agreed to participate in the consolidation, and during the consolidation, I realized the negotiations may not have been going the way I intended, but we did settle on me taking 3 of the 4 offices, and I became, as of January 2009, the County Clerk, Registrar of Voters, and Revenue Office, in addition to the other 3 hats I had. While I confess my hesitance to wear the 6 hats on a daily basis, I am thankful for my staff, and I am truly privileged to work with people that are passionate about the service that they deliver for our community. And I am also truly grateful to have the leadership position to work with them. Of course, an individual can wear multiple hats and with grit and determination succeed. But I request you consider the question, does effectiveness get sacrificed? Therefore, I confess that yes, a person can do it all, but should they do it all? And in some cases, a consolidation may be practical and benefit the citizens if no incompatibility of authority exists. Clearly, the auditor and treasurer are not compatible, and a clash of duties does so exist. Incompatibility addresses the need for independence. Government code clearly defines the treasurer's fiduciary duty entrusted with the safekeeping of all cash and investments. While a desk has no portability, cash is highly liquid and a seizable asset subject to loss in many ways. The intent of the initial laws prohibiting incompatible offices remedied this potential loss. Additional code mandates an oversight authority to audit the Treasury for potential losses by requiring a monthly audit performed by the county auditor. Internal auditing provides a cornerstone for strong governance. An auditor is an independent and is expected to provide an unbiased evaluation of accurate financial transactions and accounts. It is a fallacy to consider that someone can be unbiased of self. With sincere, no disrespect to my combined colleagues who I admire, I believe the laws were designed to avoid the perception of impropriety and maintain independence for these important fiscal offices. By consolidating treasurer tax collector with auditor controller, you erode assurance that safekeeping will be provided at its highest level and deficiencies may not be detected or exposed within an organization seeking to promote itself as a well-managed division of the county. Both the auditor and treasury investment functions are specialized field of study requiring a commitment. As the years have passed by during this evolution of myself, I no longer hold myself out as an auditor or tax accountant because much of that specialty is now stale and outdated. I now hold myself out as a chief investment officer, a treasurer, committed to preserving the capital investments through the key fiduciary prudent man principles of SLY for safety, liquidity, and yield. As an elected, I do not compromise to the political pressures to take undue risk and seek yield. However, if appointed, I would be bound by the Board of Supervisors in fear of dismissal for not abiding to their request to do so. And by the way, every Board of Supervisor has approached me to consider a cousin's friend of a sister for an investment opportunity or maybe an underwriting of bond. So I have instructed them and informed them each January when the resolution to authorize my investment authority comes up again, you have the opportunity to vote no and take on the investment function yourself. And then they understand that I am not going to be constrained by the thought that maybe I need to seek someone that would not have a truly institutional, unbiased, and independent approach at offering investments. Fathom the notion of the State Treasurer's Office being consolidated with the State Controller's Office in order to meet today's constraining budgetary issues. Clearly, the citizens of this great state would be provided no protection from the long list of harmful outcomes. And I do believe good governance can only be accomplished with the separation of the treasurer and auditor authority along with all other incompatible offices. And I thank you again for this opportunity. I have answered all of Mr. Brian Weinberger's questions in your briefing, which I have to say was very brilliant by discovering and doing all the historical background check, and I will submit that for your consideration.
Thank you very much. We'd be very happy to have it. Ms. Q, any questions of the panel? All right. Thank you very much. Ms. Adams, we now will hear from the Honorable Kent B. Christensen, who's the Assessor Recorder for Merced County.
Honorable Chair and committee members, my name is Kent B. Christensen. I'm a 32-year member of the Merced County Assessor's Office. I was elected and took office to the position of Assessor on December 25, 2006. I am currently the elected Assessor Recorder for Merced County, adding the position of Recorder as of January 5, 2009. In early 2008, the then Auditor, Controller, Recorder, Clerk, Registrar of Voters, Revenue and Reimbursement gave notice that he would be retiring January 4, 2009. Over the course of the next several months, it became known that the assistant was also going to retire. With the prospect that an outside individual would need to be hired to replace the current auditor, it became apparent that the new individual would be required to learn a lot of duties that they would be unfamiliar with, as the probability of finding someone with a diverse background would be almost impossible. I was approached by the CEO in midsummer about the prospect of taking leadership of the Recorder's Office. We believe that the combination of the Assessor and Recorder's offices made sense, especially when looking at the duties, functions, and staffing. The Tax Collector Treasurer was asked to take over the Clerk, Registrar of Voters, and Revenue and Reimbursement offices. It was believed that my existing office was well run and would continue to run well while I learned the new position. I was allowed to attend several conferences before taking over as Recorder and sat with staff before taking the position to learn what they did daily and get a general feel for the office. I was very lucky to have a Chief Recorder Clerk of 36 years working there. It was not an easy task to take over the duties of a new office, but one that was very doable. I believe that combining the Recorder with the Assessor is a good fit, and hopefully in the future some integration of the two offices will occur. Currently, they exist in different locations. I believe this action was taken to keep all the offices running at a high level of service to the public. Additional costs were incurred to the county for this change, and although there was a steep learning curve when I assumed the office, I do not believe the public suffered due to the change. I do not believe that there is an overall hardship to learn the new positions. It is helped by having a well-qualified staff to support in the transition. Both the tax collector and I are familiar with the county government and therefore understand the processes and know where to obtain information to keep a department running smoothly. I do believe that combining too many offices together make it difficult to get qualified people for the positions and creates too big of an organization to run efficiently and effectively. With change also comes new ideas, and I believe that the offices will be better for it. I believe the prior combination of offices was unwieldy for one person to manage, and therefore the departments and the public suffered. Thank you.
All right, any questions, Ms. Keough, of Mr. Christensen? Mr. Price? All right, thank you very much, Mr. Christensen, for your testimony. We now will have the Honorable Rod Dole, who's the Auditor, Controller, Treasurer, Tax Collector of Sonoma County.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Chairman,
I like your tie, by the way.
Senators, thank you. Obviously, we got the memo for this morning.
Absolutely. Congratulations. Happy St. Patrick's Day to all 6 of you.
You too. Our story in Sonoma County started back in 92, 93 when the last great recession occurred. I think any of us that have been in government, I know Peter's been in that long, where we've talked about ERAF and a number of other topics. The County of Sonoma went through a study to reorganize itself. At that time, it had 42 different departments and agencies. And it decided that that was too complex for the community, also very inefficient as an organization. We drew up a plan to reduce that down to 27 departments, which we have now created within our organization in the County of Sonoma. Of those combinations, two ideas was the combination of reducing the elected officials down from 7 to 4. Since then, we've combined the assessor, recorder, clerk into one elected position. And then recently, we've combined the auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector, which I'm that person, in Sonoma County. So we've reduced our elected officials from 7 down to 4. In 2005, the idea was upon the retirement of an elected official, we would consider the idea of the consolidation, and that's exactly how it occurred with the assessor, recorder, clerk. And then in 2005, our treasurer decided that he was going to retire at the end of his term, and that he announced that to the board early so that they could make decisions regarding the consolidation. The board was in agreement. The treasurer, tax collector was in agreement. I was in agreement that a consolidation would work for Sonoma County. What was difficult for us was the code sections. The codes were complex. One, for the director of finance, it required us to go to the voters. For the combination of auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector, that code section wasn't clear because it also said auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector, and director of finance. Didn't make sense because the director of finance is the consolidation of the auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector. So Sonoma County sought legislation to clarify that we in fact could consolidate the two elected positions, and we accomplished that in 2005 with, I believe it was Assembly Bill 1318 at that time. In 2006, the board combined the positions. We adopted both qualifications for the treasurer, tax collector, and auditor controller, so I must meet both of those qualifications as part of running for election. And in 2006, I ran for both positions. I am a 25-year elected official in Sonoma County, previously 20 years as auditor controller, most recently as auditor controller, treasurer, tax collector. It has worked very well for us. Basically, what we did, we drew up the office into 3 functions. We are an accounting firm, we are a bank, which is our treasury function, and then we are a revenue enhancement collection allocation process, and that's how the office is broken up. Our recommendation for legislative change would be, one, to clarify the code section about the ability to consolidate the auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector without that reference to director of finance. It just complicates it, in our opinion. 2, that decision be allowed to be made by the Board of Supervisors by ordinance. The other decision, whether elected or appointed, we believe should be a decision for the voters. We believe they have the right, they want to exercise the right of voting in Sonoma County, and our Board of Supervisors, as part of this consolidation, decided that this position would remain elected to give it the independence that it needed. We also think that the code should include qualifications. I believe the code right now leaves it up to a permissive process for the Board of Supervisors. We think that should be required. We think this position is very technical and should require those qualifications. Some of the benefits we've experienced from the consolidation is reduction of salary costs, efficiencies in the property tax admin, debt management, and cash management, reduction of overhead costs and positions, and also from the customer standpoint or the taxpayer, it's a one-stop shop. You walk into the office and you actually can conduct all your business at one counter. Some of the issues that need to be considered as part of the consolidation, and you heard some of those earlier from my fellow elected officials. One is the elected versus appointed. Again, our position is that should be left to the voters. Qualifications should be required. Internal controls should also be considered as an issue. In Sonoma County, we raised this issue early on because of the audit over the Treasury concern. We created an audit committee. This is similar to what the private sector does in very large corporations. I worked for a large corporation for 7 years before I came to work for the county. Also, an oversight committee for the Treasury is important. They set the policy, they set for investments. But the audit committee is very, very important because it also oversees the audit. If there were some type of conflict associated with me being over both, the audit committee could step in those cases. Also, what we did, we had our internal controls reviewed by our outside CPA firm before we actually went operational. We proposed the internal controls and had them sign off on those internal controls. It has worked very well for Sonoma County. I have now been in office for 4 years. I'm up for a re-election. I'm running unopposed, thank goodness, and it has worked well for us.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dole. Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Price?
Just one. Thank you for your testimony. You referenced the audit committee. Tell a little bit more about how that's proposed out, and how it kicks in, how recently has it been used?
Actually, that's used in a number of counties, including some of the large counties like Santa Clara, where they also have combined positions. We designated members of the Board of Supervisors as part of that audit committee, and in this case, yes, we did. They were interested in being part of that audit committee. We submit to them annually a plan for audits. I have a staff of 10 auditors. They do about 80 to 100 audits a year, and so that plan is submitted to the audit committee along with the audit reports. They're submitted to the audit committee. So they, if you will, set the direction for our audit function. They oversee the audits done on the Treasury. They also get copies of the reports as part of their approval process.
Mr. Dole, thank you. Our next panelist will be the Honorable Simona Padilla-Scholtens, who is the Auditor Controller of Solano County. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning. Simona Padilla-Scholtens. I am the current elected Auditor Controller. I am also a certified public accountant, and I have had the pleasure of working for Solano County for 26 years. Solano County has had the allowed combinations in code. We haven't had a consolidation of the treasurer auditor, tax collector, or any other where we've had to seek legislation. However, my presentation is going to be limited really to the current status of the code sections and how I believe it interferes with county government's ability to effectively carry out our business.
Please.
So first, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to provide feedback on the current status of the state law that governs office consolidations. As I was reading the code sections governing consolidations, I quickly realized the number of exceptions currently in statute that addresses the county's specific exceptions for size of population, exception for specific county needs, exceptions to work around the incompatible office, and exceptions to work around office holder qualifications. The current code section does provide, and the original codes that provided for the acceptable combinations. It was interesting. One of the previous speakers said Government Code 24300 and 24304, and referred to them as two size fits all. And that really was, when I looked at this, you have a variety of code sections that do provide for a lot of exceptions. I believe also in the Government Code 24304.1, that is a riverside only exception. 24304.2 that are exceptions for Mendocino, Sonoma, Trinity, and Tulare. There's other Government Code Section 24305 that talks about if you consolidate organizationally, you should also consolidate the budgets. There are exceptions to qualifications and many, many other exceptions. The current statutes provide for too many exceptions, ambiguities, and contradictions, and prevent counties from really seeking opportunities to both save taxpayer dollars and improve the delivery of services. When we have a code section that singles out Contra Costa and Riverside and prohibits them from taking advantage of consolidation opportunities when all other 56 counties can do the consolidation, it's time to really look at our statutes. State law should not restrict consolidations based on population. State law, I believe, should provide a general framework. I think it's important that state law provide a general framework that would allow county officials to determine the best operating structure within our own local framework to achieve economies, improve service, and maintain the system necessary for checks and balances. I believe the current power of referendum and initiative is sufficient voters' role in approving consolidations or an opportunity for the voters to express their dissatisfaction. With regards to consolidation and incompatible offices, current code does prohibit holding incompatible offices. However, the courts have also ruled that the legislature can abolish the prohibition, and many counties, as was said previously, have sought legislation to avoid the legal challenge and have obtained statutes that have addressed the single county or a group of counties exemptions. This has resulted in inconsistent applications throughout the state. Consolidations are permissible in one county, yet they're not in others. Again, my position is that the state needs to provide a general framework. Consolidation should be left to the governing body of the county. It is imperative, however, that the counties establish a strong internal control structure and an oversight mechanism, such as what Rod Dole indicated of an audit oversight committee, to ensure the presence of checks and balances within the organization. I believe that the legislature should allow the consolidation of auditor controllers, tax collectors throughout all 58 counties, not to have piecemeal legislation that certain counties can do one combination and others, 4 or 5 can do the consolidation of auditor controller, treasurer, tax collectors. I think that counties have the responsibility to ensure that adequate internal controls are put in place, to ensure that the proper checks and balances are within the organization. Mitigating controls can include the function of auditing by the external auditor, also maintaining, and it's very important that maintain this auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collector function as an elected office. The code section that governs Government Code 24009, I think it's very key. I think that code needs to stay intact. That leaves the voters the ability to decide whether any combination should be elected or appointed. With regards to consolidation in charter counties, while the law, when you look at charter counties where they have the broader authority to consolidate county offices, pretty much they have stayed in line with the provisions of the current general law. The law should provide the framework. Specific exceptions need to be considered by each county to allow for flexibility in achieving operational efficiencies, economies of scale, and the adequate separation of duties. State law currently presents, in my opinion, unnecessary obstacles when considering consolidations. The current law and practices, again, has resulted in inconsistent combinations throughout the 58 counties. Whether we are a charter county or a general law county, I believe that consolidations need to be considered. They need to make sense. They need to, obviously, if it saves money, we're all interested in saving money. We need to consider that. And overall, if they improve the efficiency in the delivery of goods without compromising, again, the checks and balances. With regards to the qualifications, current law also is very contradictory. There are code sections that do provide for qualifications, but yet there are also other laws that exempt. It is very important, in my opinion, that office holders in these positions maintain adequate qualifications. In summary, the current law provides for too many exceptions, making the application of law confusing, contradictory, and inconsistent across the 58 counties. Current law, in many ways, does not allow the flexibility to seek operational efficiencies without seeking a change to the law. Statute should provide a general framework for all counties to generally adhere to when considering consolidations. Strong internal control structure should be put in place in all cases, thereby minimizing the risk from consolidations from perceived incompatible functions applicable to all counties, whether charter or general law. I believe the provisions of Government Code 24009 for elective offices should be strictly enforced, and the qualifications for all office holders are necessary to ensure the office holder possesses the minimum qualifications to carry out the responsibilities of the job.
Thank you very much for your testimony. Any questions, Mr. Price? All right. The next will be Sherry Rafferty, who is the Treasurer Tax Collector for El Dorado County. Welcome, Ms. Rafferty. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm the Treasurer Tax Collector of El Dorado County, and I'd like to add a perspective to the notion of you're making it easier to combine elective offices, reducing the number of elected offices, and creating large appointed finance departments in counties. I'll limit my comments to the area of finance. In reading the staff report and in conversations with CAOs and some board members, not all, there seems to be a few underlying assumptions. First, if you combine offices, this will somehow make county government more efficient. The second assumption is that if you appoint someone to an office, somehow you will be guaranteed a better qualified individual in filling these positions. And the third assumption is that somehow you'll save taxpayers' dollars. These arguments we hear frequently from non-elected CAOs throughout the state. And I'd like to take just a few minutes to debunk some of these assumptions. I'll start with the idea of efficiency. I'd like to respectfully point out that, yes, when you think about efficiency, really think about overall global for the county efficiency, the logical extension of that is the most efficient form of government is a dictatorship. Let's face it, it's streamlined, it's efficient, it's the best there is in existence today as far as those two things go. A representative form of government is by its nature messy, but it's better than a streamlined dictatorship. No one questions the authority of the ruler.
I guess unless you're the dictator.
Right? No one offers alternative solutions, i.e., as we do going to the Board of Supervisors, for example. No one cares what the people governed think about what's happening. And when you eliminate elective offices, in my humble opinion, you are moving in the direction of non-elected form of government. And this is not good. In El Dorado County, we like voting for our elected officials and find the departments they represent the most responsive to our citizens. In survey after survey, you're not going to believe this, but the sheriff and the tax collectors department come out as most favored of our citizens. Now, I'd like you to think about this, okay? The tax collector's office, they're happiest with. This is the office that charges penalties if you're late and bills you year after year. That's amazing. The second assumption is that by doing away with more elective offices, you will somehow gain better qualified individuals in positions as treasurer tax collector. I again would question this notion. I am an elected treasurer tax collector, but I'm also a certified public accountant with a master's degree. Prior to becoming treasurer tax collector, I had a successful CPA firm. And had served on the board of directors of a successful bank. I had also served and been elected 2 times to the board of trustees of the Los Rios Community College. It's the 5th largest community college district in the nation. Huge budget. It's larger than our county budget. As a past president of the California Association of County Treasurers and Tax Collectors, I can assure you that I found equally qualified individuals the norm as treasurer tax collectors throughout the state. What I have found, however, is that typically no credence is given within county government to the experience in the rough and tumble world of private industry. And this is unfortunate. Because private industry experience, as a famous talk show host would say, is a good thing. And bringing more people in from business communities with better ways to build a mousetrap is always a good thing to mix things up. Most states, and for that matter, most sovereign governments, separate the auditor controller's offices from their treasurer tax collectors. Departments. The reason for this is simple. The auditor controls the disbursements within a county. He or she reviews the activity of other departments, including the county treasury and tax collectors, through which flow billions and billions of dollars. Yes, even in a mid-sized county like El Dorado County, billions flow through the treasury. By keeping these 2 offices separate, you are keeping the fox out of the chicken coop, so to speak, and creating a solid wall between the 2 offices for the purposes of internal controls. Again, this is a good thing. The third assumption is that somehow, miraculously, you will save taxpayers' dollars by eliminating elected offices and combining them in a single, very often the recommendation is appointive office. This streamlining, the presumption is, would be great. There has been no long-term study that proves this notion is true. In addition, there has been no long-term study that indicates this creates better government. Quite the contrary. Our analysis in El Dorado County indicates that the growth in staff, which is usually 80% of a department's budget, is far greater in the appointed department heads departments than it is in the elective department heads budget. The reason for this is the electeds have to go out and defend the increases in their budgets. Appointeds don't have to do that to the same extent. They have to defend it to their Board of Supervisors, but not to the electorate, not to their citizens. The problem with eliminating an elected treasurer tax collector's office is that you are putting the office's allegiances into the hands of the CAO or CEO and ultimately the Board of Supervisors. Let me ask this. When a board member lobbies for penalty cancellations for a big league developer, developers are big money, okay? This can be tens of thousands of dollars. It can be hundreds of thousands of dollars in the larger counties. Who will the appointed finance director be interested in pleasing? The public or their board member or their CAO who reports to the board? When bond issues are being reviewed, who will bring up those pesky little questions that cost millions of dollars? But few people know about, or even fewer people understand. As an aside, I recall being the lone voice that once said on a committee filled with, "We've got to get this deal done," people, appointed department heads, that no, doing a Mello-Roos bond for a subdivision that didn't have their water entitlement and had no future of prospectively getting it was, in my opinion, not a good idea. Why was I the lone voice? Because I didn't have to worry about what my board members thought of my financial recommendation. My job wasn't dependent upon them, but the appointed's jobs were. I could do the right thing because I did not want El Dorado County to lose its reputation in the bond market and lose possibly millions of dollars on a bond for a subdivision that shouldn't be built. Now, I want you to know that a few years later, they got their water entitlement, and we did do the Mello-Roos bonds. And I was very supportive at that time. Okay. All right. I'd like to suggest that not every idea that sounds good is good. Eliminating elective offices, making it easier for a Board of Supervisors, for example, to eliminate those pesky and sometimes both the auditor controller and the treasurer tax collector can be kind of pesky to a board. I'll call them truth tellers. Eliminating debates on issues in favor of let's never have two sides of an argument appear in public isn't necessarily, in my opinion, a better type of government.
Ms. Rafferty, thank you very much. Let's see if Ms. Keogh has any questions for you this morning, and then we'll move. I know you have just a little bit more to go there, but let's see if Ms. Keogh has any questions for you. Mr. Price?
No.
All right. All right. Because we are under time schedule, Mr. Ward, your time has expired. I'm just kidding you about that. So you take whatever time is necessary, and if you need some additional notes, you may ask Ms. Rafferty for some of her notes.
Senator Cox, I will be brief. But Senator Cox, honorable board members, my name is Larry Ward. I'm the Assessor County Clerk Recorder for Riverside County, or as Mr. Weinberger mentioned, of the 11th class, I believe. A little background, how we became the Assessor County Clerk Recorder. In 1997, the elected elections or register clerk recorder retired, and it was decided to or looked at combining the offices of the Assessor County Clerk Recorder. They did that. They split off the elections position, made that an appointed position, so they got rid of one elected official. And I think now we have approximately 25, soon to be 26 assessor offices statewide that are some kind of combination. My comments just are really going to be from kind of the public perspective. The benefits of the combination, at least from a Riverside perspective. I think we've seen over the years substantial cost savings because we have been the assessor county clerk recorder for about 13 years. We see cost savings in things like IT, administration, budget, the overlapping positions that you would have if they were separate departments. I think public service, for example, we are able to provide a full range of services to the public through our county. We have a large county, we have a number of district offices, and we provide assessor, county clerk, recorder services at each one of those district offices, which I think is a plus that wasn't done in the past. Also, cross-training of staff, especially in today's time where we're all looking at budget cuts and staffing shortfalls, being able to reassign staff among the various departments is a real plus. And then finally, just the whole idea of workflow. With the assessor, the recording of documents really starts the whole process. So the change in ownership, we control that process, and I think that's a real benefit for us. Probably some of the negatives would be different cultures. Anytime you combine offices, I think you have the different cultures, which sometimes takes a while to work through. You do have sometimes the overlap of services and positions. It takes a while to just work out. I think also there's a challenge for top management when you're taking on additional positions, learning the different functions. I know a couple of my colleagues are election officials, and that's a very time-consuming process, which takes away from maybe some of the other functions that they have. But overall, I would say for Riverside, it's been good for Riverside. I think we benefit the public, or it has benefited the public, who were elected to serve. I think, as my colleague, Mr. Christensen, indicated, I think consideration should be given on what offices are combined, because I think it can create some problems. Regarding the elected or appointed, I think being elected provides a level of independence that has served the public well. I know in Riverside County a number of years ago, it went to the ballot to make the auditor a appointed position rather than elected position, and it was soundingly defeated. So with that, thank you for the opportunity. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Ward, for your testimony, and thank you to the other 5 members who have been the panelists. Is there anyone who, Ms. Keogh, any questions? Mr. Price, any one of the 6 of you feel compelled to make any other point that you didn't get to make, Ms. Rafferty?
I just had one paragraph
That's
left.
okay. You go ahead. I'm sorry.
Basically, I would encourage you to make it as difficult as possible to combine offices or eliminate elected positions in accounting. But if you choose to do so, always have an election to build consensus with the public before doing so. There can't possibly be any harm.
All right. Thank you very much. Anybody else have one last word?
Just real quick, I do want to make a correction. Not each Board of Supervisor addressed investment and underwriting issues. Most of them were tax penalty removal. But also, I wanted to also say, I understand the Board of Supervisors concerned about having qualified people at the helm. I mean, that is not an issue. But I also don't want this to be, consolidations to be an easy fix as the baby boomers exit, and of course exit and retire, taking vast amounts of institutional knowledge. And so this is just what I consider the beginning of maybe taking elected positions, consolidating, making it an easy fix to solve the baby boomer exiting issue. And then because of their concerns about just anybody running for these consolidated offices, then the appointments become the reality. That's the next step. And so I'm sure that this committee, thank you for doing your fact-finding, and I'm sure that you're very concerned about providing some good code for us. Thank you.
In fact, anticipate that there will perhaps be a proposal to make some amendments to the code section to try to bring it up to date, and you can certainly be assured that we will send out to you, as well as other folks, the information so that you'll have an opportunity to look at it and to make your decision. Thank you very much for coming this morning. We appreciate your coming to Sacramento, and we appreciate you being here. Now, if we could ask Tracy Kennedy Desmond, as well as Keith Williams, as well as Randy Hicks, as well as Bill Polisek.
CSR.
All right, Bill, come forward if you would, please. And we'll begin with you this morning, sir. You are from, you're the Treasurer Tax Collector of Contra Costa County.
Yes, I am. I've been the Treasurer Tax Collector. I'm just finishing up my third term, and just so everyone knows, I've decided not to run for re-election. It's time to retire. However, this was a second career for me. Prior to that, I was a senior credit officer, senior credit administrator, credit policy auditing individual with 2 California major banks for almost 30 years. I learned as a very young credit and auditor, rule number 1 is in a financial operation, you must have a clear separation of duties and responsibilities. Rule number 2, don't forget rule number 1. In my experience, I have found almost every cause of embezzlement and financial irregularities are due to a lack of a good separation of duties and responsibilities. Now, in deference to the combined auditor, controller, treasurer, tax collectors we already have in the state, I am also speaking for my auditor controller from Contra Costa County. We believe that we need the separation of offices. I collect approximately $2.5 billion in taxes. I manage a $2 billion investment pool, not only for the county, but my schools and special districts. And we process about $5 or $6 billion in total deposits. Who audits my treasury and does all the cash counts? The Auditor Controller's Office. Who audits all the tax trust funds? The Auditor Controller's Office. You must have a clear separation of duties and responsibilities with individuals that are independent to carry out these functions. If you combine these 2 offices, you no longer have that independence. And as the elected treasurer tax collector, as well as having an elected auditor controller, we are often approached by county administrators and supervisors to do things which are highly irregular, and in one case, actually illegal. I have had my arm twisted to put money into banks, one of which was within 30 days of being shut down by the FDIC, and had it not been for the State Commissioner of Banking and the FDIC to bring in a white knight, we possibly could have lost dollars, but we didn't, because we never made the investment because I said no. I think others have talked about the waiving of interest and penalties. Being independent, that can be handled as an individual carrying out the duties of the office, not being beholden to the board or to the county administrator. And very frankly, there are supervisors that don't pay their taxes, and you have to collect them. And then being in the 37 Act, I'm also told how to vote on the retirement board. That doesn't go, because I have a fiduciary responsibility to the retirement system. My board now understands that, and so they usually leave me alone in that area. But anyway, in just summarizing, the idea of cost savings, they may prove very illusionary if you do not have separation of duties and responsibilities.
Thank you for your testimony. Ms. Keogh? Mr. Price. Whoops, Ms. Keogh.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Mr. Price? All right. Next is Keith Williams, who's the Mariposa County Treasurer and Tax Collector, as well as County Clerk. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. This is an honor to be here. My name is Keith Williams. I'm the elected Treasurer, Tax Collector, County Clerk, and Registrar of Voters for Mariposa County. And I do like your painting, since Mariposa is home of Yosemite National Park.
Very good. I think that's the first comment on the art I've ever heard in 10 years here.
It's beautiful.
You get my vote.
Thank you. I am running unopposed, by the way.
You can use my name anyway.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, good luck.
Well, I would just like to I heard a lot said today, and I do, would like to say that I would like to state my opposition to the creation of any legislation that would simplify the Board of Supervisors' ability to consolidate offices or change elected to appointed positions. I feel that power should remain with the people. I was with the auditor's office for 12 years, and one of the first things that I learned when I started in 1991 was the separation of duties. Everything was a checks and balance, and I believe that combining the auditor controller with any other position is losing that checks and balance. They're the chief accountant and should stand alone. I had some other stuff, but I'd like to just mention referendum was used as a kind of a vehicle to maybe undo what a board does. But as a registrar of voters, referendums are very difficult for the public to actually get across. They take a lot of signatures and a lot of work. And by the time one makes it to the ballot, a lot will have been done, and it would just cost the county more money to undo something that the voters changed. And so it's highly unlikely that they would come back with a referendum because the offices would be combined, split, people let go. So referendums are very difficult vehicles to use to undo something at a later date, unless it's really, really important. But
I understand. Any questions of Mr. Williams? Mr. Williams, thank you for your testimony. Next is Randy Hicks. Mr. Hicks, good morning.
I'm going to speak as a member of Californians with Disability Rights and the public. Sometimes putting two programs together is not necessarily a good thing, because what happens is what my president of CDR used to say is they tried to do this with senior and disability programs. They tried to consolidate them together and try to make it and cut staff. Well, that makes both the seniors and the disabled lose out. It's like having two inaccessible banks, making them into one inaccessible bank that nobody can ever get into. I'm also on a commission, but I'm not going to speak for the commission, but I can tell you that on a commission, we have learned that sometimes you have to have the separation of powers because somebody is always going to want something. And that's just the way it is. It's just that when the public goes there, they don't trust county as it is, or they don't trust government as it is, and all of a sudden you're going to have a plan where one department be able to run the other department without any accountability. That's not a good idea either. And the last thing I would like to say is that if we could find a way to do this and have equal powers, that would be a great idea. But I don't think it's going to happen. And I believe that the public still has the right to know. And sometimes when they do these consolidations, the public doesn't have the right to know. All of a sudden, they want to go do something that used to be in that office. Well, that office doesn't exist anymore. It's over here. And they don't know it, and they're not being told. So I believe anything that's done, the public, the Sunshine Law, accountability, all that has to be in place. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hicks. Any questions, Mr. Hicks? All right. Tracy Kennedy Desmond, you are next, ma'am.
Oops, thank you. My chair came off of the wheel.
Oh, my goodness.
Anyway, do you want me to fix the chair or just move?
Why don't you just switch chairs?
Sorry about that. Anyway, I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for the opportunity, and sorry about the furniture.
Wait a minute. I think you broke that chair. You broke the chair.
I'll buy you a new one.
That was your chair to begin with.
I'm the duly elected Madera County Treasurer Tax Collector. I was first elected in 1990 and took office in 1991. I have served the good people of Madera County for over 22 years and feel that I have done a good job for them. Understanding one size does not fit all, it is my position that this office should remain both elected and intact as the Treasurer Tax Collector only, and not combined with the Auditor Controller or any other county elected official. I would submit to you to restrict combinations and to further restrict any conversion to appointed. Last year, my county went through this exact discussion. The board wanted to gain control of the Auditor Controller's office upon his retirement by making it appointed. Although the Brown Act does exist, we were blindsided week after week with items put on the board agenda by County Council with only a week's notice for us to prepare any research and do any presentation. County Council had weeks to prepare and staff to work on this project. I'm proud to say our board ultimately made the right decision and kept our elected Auditor Controller elected. The system worked. Combining offices that have statutorily
been separate seems to me to be nothing more than a slippery slope to making these offices appointed, thus giving the governing board more and more power. These combinations and/or attempts to make elected officials appointed department heads are usually done at opportunistic times when the office holders are retiring. The timing of these attempts suggests to me that the position, which was valuable and necessary as a separate and elected office, is now being postured for a final takeover as either an appointed department head or as a combined super agency, giving ultimate control to one body. Even if this is not the intent of the board or the CAOs at the time of combination, looking forward, they are limiting their options in the future for filling the super agencies they are creating, thus gaining more and more control and removing the choice from the voters. The fact that we answer to a greater body of constituents than our board does individually by supervisor districts allows us autonomy and gives us a voice. It gives us an opportunity to tell the truth without worry of undue political pressures. As an elected official, you can play it straight. You can fulfill the spirit of public service and be effective. It is my sincerest hope that this committee will understand the complexities of our offices, the intentions of our predecessors for these offices to remain not combined, independent, countywide elected officials.
As you read the white paper this morning, the staff report, do you agree that there are some areas that ought to be looked at from a standpoint of the entire 58 counties as to whether or not there ought to be any exceptions, or whether or not there ought to be just one county in the state of California that this section applies to, or is it your position that the combining or the elimination of the elected position, we ought to just let all this go and be done with it?
I don't believe that you should reduce further elected officials in counties.
That's the only thing you're addressing this morning. You're not addressing some of the other areas in the code section that were talked about.
Or combined.
Or combined.
Or combined. I believe that they should stay separate, and I believe they should stay elected.
I understand that part. What I was trying to get to, like, for example, there was the one statute that had to do only with Riverside County.
Well, see, what happens is that's why it's a slippery slope. What they do is they take an opportunity when somebody retires.
This is not about, this is...
Right, I know, your exceptions.
I'm just trying to figure out whether or not, from your vantage point, any kind of work on the sections that have been outlined here have any merit, or is it that you believe by just starting there, it creates a problem?
Well, you know, I'm a smaller county. I believe that it was set up originally for a purpose, and I believe that they shouldn't be making the exceptions, or they should be harder to make.
Okay. Ms. Keogh, any questions of these four panelists?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good comments.
Thank you very much for your presence today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
We appreciate now, it is our intention in a thank you very much. In a 4, 5, or 6 week period of time, there will be a summary of this meeting prepared and available to you. Please be assured that we won't attempt to make any changes without the proper input from the appointeds as well as the electeds.
Mr. Chairman, may I, now that you say a summary is going to be prepared, and you know, I know that's the standard procedure, I guess I would just ask a question of you, or a comment to you, that the counties have the authority, or I'm asking, do the counties now have the authority to consolidate should they choose? We've heard some different examples, whether they have to clear it with the vote of the people.
I think it depends upon their charter, but sure. Let's ask Brian about that.
Senator, charter counties do, in fact, have the authority to consolidate offices regardless of what statutes we're looking at today had to say under the terms of their own local voter-approved charters. And so there are 14 charter counties, and they really aren't strictly governed by the general law, the statutes that we're looking at today. The other 44 counties are restricted just to the specific terms that appear in these statutes.
And is it the committee's, will the committee be making recommendations when the summary is prepared?
Yes, there will be some recommendations, and I think we've spoken with the chair that this input that we're getting is with an eye towards the introduction of legislation probably in the next legislative session. We're not looking at a bill or legislation moving forward this year, but it's to start the conversation with an eye towards perhaps introducing something next year.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
We'll have the opportunity to vet anything. I'm not one, by the way, who believes we ought to eliminate elected positions. So we need to start from that basis. I do realize, by the way, the easiest time to eliminate the elected is when they're either retiring or they have died, because basically there's no resistance at that particular point in time. But I am one, by the way, who believes that those positions ought to be elected as opposed to appointed.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you all very much for coming. We appreciate your being here, and both Ms. Keogh and I would welcome any comments, as well as Mr. Price, as well as Senator Anistad. Welcome any advice or information that you might want to provide us at some later date. Thank staff for the work that you have done today. So thank you very much. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
We're fairly close to being on time.